The Monster and the Man. The silent before the storm carries its own weight. Inside the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas, November 22, 1986, a 20-year-old man sat alone in the darkness of a locker room. His hands were wrapped, his body was ready, but his mind traveled somewhere else entirely. Outside those walls, 15,000 voices roared in anticipation. Television cameras from around the world waited to capture what many believed would be just another execution. Another victim fed to the machine that was Mike Tyson. But in that moment of stillness, the young man was not thinking about the fight ahead. He was thinking about a voice, now silent. A voice that had promised him he would become the heavyweight champion of the world. A voice that belonged to a man who had died exactly 1 year and 18 days earlier, never living to see this night. The monster they called Iron Mike was about to be born. But before the monster, there was a boy. Before the championship, there was Brownsville. Before the glory, there was only darkness and the faint hope that somewhere in the violence there might be salvation. This is not just the story of the youngest heavyweight champion in history. This is not merely the tale of a boxer who rose and fell and rose again. This is the story of a human being caught between two worlds, between the boy who loved pigeons and the man who bit off another man's ear, between the champion who inspired millions and the convict who lost everything. Mike Tyson's life reads like a Greek tragedy written by the streets themselves. Every triumph shadowed by trauma. Every victory followed by violence. Every moment of transcendence pulled back down by the weight of who he was and where he came from. His story is America's story, told through fists and fury, through money and madness, through the redemption that always seems just out of reach. What makes a monster? Is it the circumstances that birth him, or the choices he makes once he's free? Can a man truly change, or does the darkness that shaped him always lurk beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to return? These are not simple questions, and Mike Tyson's life provides no simple answers. But in the telling of his tale, in the honest examination of both his brilliance and his brutality, we might find something true about the human capacity for destruction and the equally powerful capacity for transformation. The bell would soon ring, the fight would begin, and nothing would ever be the same.
Part 1. Born in Darkness.
Chapter 1. Brownsville's Child. The summer heat in Brooklyn hung thick and suffocating on June 30th, 1966, when Michael Gerard Tyson entered a world that seemed determined to crush him before he could stand. At Cumberland Hospital, in the Fort Greene section, Lorna Mae Smith Tyson delivered an 8-pound, 7-ounce baby boy, her third child. His father, Jimmy Kirkpatrick, was already a ghost, a street hustler who frequented pool halls and lived in the margins of legality. Within 2 years, Jimmy Kirkpatrick would vanish completely, leaving Lorna to raise 3 children alone in one of America's most unforgiving urban landscapes. Young Mike's first memories were not of safety or warmth, but of movement and instability. The family shifted from one cramped apartment to another, always one rent payment away from eviction, always struggling to keep food on the table. His older brother Rodney and sister Denise tried to shield him when they could, but poverty has a way of making children grow up too fast. By the time Mike was 7 years old, the family settled at 178 Amboy Street in Brownsville, a neighborhood that would shape him in ways both terrible and profound. Brownsville, in the 1970s, was not just poor. It was a war zone, the murder capital of New York City, a place where violence was not an exception, but the rule. Gunshots punctuated summer nights. Sirens wailed like a chorus of the damned. Buildings stood hollow and gutted, their windows like dead eyes watching the slow death of a community. This was the crucible in which Mike Tyson was forged. Perpendicular, who would become the most feared fighter in the world, was, in those early years, terrified himself. He was different from the other kids, softer somehow, with a high-pitched voice that made him an easy target. The neighborhood predators sensed weakness the way sharks sense blood in water. They pushed him, checked his pockets, took what little he had. He learned quickly that in Brownsville you were either the hunter or the prey. But Mike had something the others did not expect. Beneath the baby fat and the lisping voice, beneath the fear and the tears, there was a furnace of rage building. When his mother came home drunk, when there was no food in the refrigerator, when the older boys cornered him in the stairwell, something inside him began to harden. The first time he fought back, he discovered a truth that would define his existence. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger. Powerless, by the time he was 8 years old, Mike Tyson had beaten up anyone in the neighborhood who bothered his family. He fought with a ferocity that surprised even himself, something primal and unstoppable once unleashed. The other kids learned to leave him alone. But that power came with a price. Fighting felt good. Hurting people who hurt him felt right. And in a place like Brownsville, that kind of thinking only led one direction. His mother, Lorna, was fighting her own demons. The bottle was both her escape and her prison. She worked when she could, cleaned houses and took whatever jobs were available, but the weight of poverty and addiction pulled her down. She loved her children in her way, but love in Brownsville often looked like survival, and survival meant everyone was on their own. Mike found solace in the strangest place, pigeons. On the rooftops of Brownsville, he kept a flock of birds, tending to them with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a boy learning to solve every problem with violence. The pigeons did not judge him. They did not push him or take from him. They simply flew, and for brief moments, watching them soar above the rotting buildings and crack-littered streets, Mike Tyson could imagine a world beyond Brownsville. But that world always called him back down. School became a place he rarely visited. By 5th grade, Mike could barely read. Education seemed pointless when survival took every ounce of energy. The streets offered more immediate lessons: how to spot a mark, how to take what you needed, how to disappear when the police came around. There was something else, too. Something Mike would not speak about for many years. At age 7, a stranger had violated him in ways that a child should never know. The trauma of that event buried itself deep, adding another layer to the rage and confusion that was building inside him. In Brownsville, you did not talk about such things. You swallowed them down and kept moving, kept surviving, kept fighting. Chapter 2. The Making of a Criminal. By the time Mike Tyson turned 11, he had stopped pretending to be anything other than what Brownsville made him, a criminal. Drinking became routine. Marijuana smoke filled his lungs as easily as the summer air. He mugged people in the streets, taking wallets and watches with the casual efficiency of someone much older. The police became a regular presence in his life, and he learned to run fast, to lie convincingly, to always have an escape route planned. His arrest record grew with alarming speed. 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. By his 12th birthday, Mike Tyson had been arrested more than 40 times. Think about that number. 40 arrests before adolescence even truly began. Each one represented another moment of desperation, another robbery, another assault, another choice that pulled him deeper into the undertow. The system did not know what to do with him. He was too young for adult prison, too dangerous for most juvenile programs. Social workers looked at his file and saw a lost cause. Police officers knew his name, knew his face, knew he was headed for an early grave or a life sentence. Mike knew it too. He accepted it the way you accept the sunrise. This was his destiny, written in the concrete and blood of Brownsville. His mother tried. God knows she tried. But Lorna Mae Tyson was drowning in her own struggles, and Mike was beyond what she could control. When the police came to the door yet again in 1979, When Mike was 13 years old, she made a choice that would change everything. She let them take him. Maybe she hoped they could do what she could not. Maybe she was just exhausted. Either way, Mike Tyson was sent upstate to the Tryon School for Boys in Johnstown, New York. The Tryon School was supposed to be a correctional facility, a place where troubled boys learned discipline and order. For most of the residents, it was just another cage. But for Mike Tyson, it became the doorway to a different life, though he did not know it yet. Flushing, he arrived, angry, defiant, ready to fight anyone who looked at him wrong. The other boys quickly learned to give him space. Even at 13, Mike carried himself with a threatening presence. He was not tall, only about 5 feet 6 inches, but he was unusually strong. His shoulders and arms developed beyond his years from a lifetime of street fighting and survival. The counselors at Tryon saw dozens of boys like Mike every year. Most would cycle through the system and end up dead or in prison by 25. But one counselor, a man named Bobby Stewart, saw something different. Stewart had been an amateur boxing champion, a light heavyweight who understood both the discipline of the sport and the rage that drove boys like Mike Tyson to violence. He watched Mike in the yard, watched him shadow boxing when he thought no one was looking, watched the way other boys instinctively backed away from him. Stewart approached Mike with an offer, would teach him how to box if Mike promised to stay out of trouble and focus on his education. Mike agreed, though not because he cared about school. He agreed because boxing was fighting, and fighting was the only language he truly spoke. Those first training sessions revealed something extraordinary. Mike was not just strong or aggressive, he was naturally gifted, with reflexes and hand speed that could not be taught. More than that, he had an almost pathological dedication once he found something that mattered to him. While the other boys slept, Mike shadowboxed in his cell until 3 or 4 in the morning, working combinations until his arms burned and sweat soaked through his clothes. Stewart trained him for months, teaching him the basics, watching him improve at a rate that seemed almost supernatural. But eventually, Stewart realized he had taught Mike everything he could. The boy needed more than an amateur light heavyweight could provide. He needed someone who could channel that raw power into something greater. Someone who had created champions before. Stewart knew exactly where to take him. About 50 miles south of the Tryon School, in the small town of Catskill, New York, there lived a legendary boxing trainer named Constantine "Cuss" D'Amato. D'Amato had trained Floyd Patterson, the youngest heavyweight champion, before Mike would break that record. He had trained Jose Torres, the light heavyweight champion. He was a student of boxing psychology, a man who believed that fear could be overcome, that champions were made through mental conditioning as much as physical training. D'Amato was 72 years old in 1980, living in a large Victorian house with his partner, Camille Evold. The house had become a halfway home for young boxers, a place where troubled kids could learn discipline and purpose. D'Amato had mostly retired from active training, but he still ran a small gym above the police station on Main Street in Catskill. He was waiting, though he might not have admitted it, for one more fighter. One more chance to create a champion. When Bobby Stewart brought 13-year-old Mike Tyson to meet Cuss D'Amato, something happened that neither of them expected. They recognized each other, not as strangers meeting for the first time, but as two souls who had been searching for each other across the wasteland of American poverty and violence. Cuss saw in Mike the raw material for a champion unlike any he had created before. And Mike saw in Cuss something he had never really had: a father. Discharged D'Amato watched Mike work the heavy bag for 30 minutes. He saw the power, yes, but more importantly, he saw the hunger. This boy wanted it with an intensity that was almost frightening. After the session, D'Amato spoke to Stewart privately. "This boy," he said, "will be the heavyweight champion of the world." Mike heard those words, and for the first time in his life, he believed in a future beyond Brownsville. Cuss D'Amato had given him something more valuable than technique or training. He had given him hope. Arrangements were made for Mike to stay with D'Amato and Camille Ewald between his sessions at Tryon. The Victorian house became his real home, the first stable environment he had ever known. Camille cooked meals, provided clean clothes, treated him like family. Cuss spent hours with him, not just training his body but conditioning his mind, teaching him that fear was the boxer's greatest enemy and that confidence came from preparation and belief. Then, in 1982, the worst and best thing happened. Lorna Mae Tyson, worn down by years of alcohol and struggle, died of cancer. She was only 52 years old. Mike was 16, and he lost the one blood connection he had left. But in that loss, Cuss D'Amato stepped forward completely. He became Mike's legal guardian, officially adopting the teenager and bringing him permanently into his home. Mike Tyson now had a father, and Cuss D'Amato had his final masterpiece. Part 2. The Spark of Redemption. Chapter 3. The Man Who Believed. The transformation of Mike Tyson from street criminal to disciplined fighter did not happen overnight. It happened in the gym above the Catskill police station, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. Cuss D'Amato was not just teaching Mike how to box, he was rebuilding him from the ground up, replacing the chaos of Brownsville with the structure of purpose. D'Amato's training philosophy centered on something he called the peekaboo style. The fighter kept his gloves high, close to his cheeks, protecting his face while constantly moving. The stance looked defensive, almost timid, but it was actually designed for explosive offense. From that tight guard, a fighter could slip punches with minimal head movement and counter with devastating combinations. The style required incredible conditioning, split-second timing, and absolute commitment. It was perfect for Mike Tyson. Every morning began before dawn. Mike ran through the quiet streets of Catskill, building the cardiovascular endurance that would allow him to maintain his ferocious pace for an entire fight. Then came the gym work. Endless rounds on the heavy bag, speed bag, double-end bag. Shadowboxing until his muscles screamed. Mitt work with Cuss, and later with Teddy Atlas, another trainer working under D'Amato. Sparring sessions, where Mike faced older, more experienced fighters and learned to take punishment as well as dish it out. Psychologist was only half the process. Cuss D'Amato was a psychologist as much as a trainer. He understood that boxing was fought in the mind as much as in the ring. Every evening, after training, Cuss would sit with Mike and talk about fear. Everyone feels fear, Cuss explained. The coward runs from it. The hero learns to control it, to channel it into aggression and focus. Fear was not the enemy. Fear was fuel. Cuss also had Mike study boxing history, watching old fights on grainy videotapes, learning from the legends. Jack Dempsey's devastating body attack, Rocky Marciano's relentless pressure, Muhammad Ali's ability to control the mental game before the physical fight even began. Mike absorbed these lessons with a focus that bordered on obsession. He was not just learning to be a boxer, he was learning to be a destroyer. Camille Ewald provided the other half of Mike's education. In her kitchen, Mike learned table manners and basic courtesy. She made sure he did his homework, even though school remained a struggle. She told him he was smart, capable, worthy of respect. These might seem like small things, but for a boy who had grown up with almost nothing, who had been treated like garbage by the world, Camille's unconditional acceptance was revolutionary. For the first time in his life, Mike Tyson felt safe. The Victorian house in Catskill became his sanctuary, a place where he did not have to fight just to survive. He could focus all that rage and power into something productive, something that might actually lead somewhere beyond prison or death. But the streets of Brownsville never fully left him. The violence was still there, buried beneath the surface. Once, when another trainer named Teddy Atlas pulled a gun on Mike after an incident involving Atlas's young niece, the moment revealed how close Mike always was to chaos. Atlas left D'Amato's camp, and the incident was buried. But it served as a reminder that Mike Tyson was not fully tamed. He was controlled, directed, but the monster was always there. Cus D'Amato knew this. He knew that Mike carried demons that would never completely disappear. But he also believed that those demons could be channeled, that the same fury that made Mike dangerous on the streets could make him unstoppable in the ring. It was a calculated risk, and Cus bet everything on it. In 1981, at age 15, Mike Tyson won his first amateur title, the Junior Olympic Games gold medal. He won again in 1982. The boxing world began to take notice. Scouts from major gyms came to Catskill to watch this teenage wrecking machine destroy opponents. Mike was not elegant or technical in the way some amateurs were. He was pure violence, throwing hooks and uppercuts with bad intentions, looking for the knockout from the opening bell. Promoters started circling, offering money and promises. But Cus D'Amato kept them at bay. Mike was not ready yet. He needed more seasoning, more mental preparation. Cus knew that the professional boxing world was a pit of vipers, full of corrupt promoters and managers who would exploit a young fighter and discard him once his usefulness ended. If Mike was going to survive and succeed, he needed to be not just physically ready, but mentally unbreakable. Protecting, the training intensified. Cus brought in better sparring partners, brought in other trainers like Kevin Rooney to add variety to Mike's preparation. They worked on the peekaboo style until it became second nature. Mike slipping punches by fractions of inches and countering with combinations that came so fast they seemed like one continuous explosion. His power was already legendary in the gym. Sparring partners told stories of body shots that felt like being hit with a bat, headshots that made the world disappear for seconds at a time. Cus told Mike over and over, "You're going to be the heavyweight champion of the world. You're going to be the youngest heavyweight champion in history. I see it. You'll see it too." And Mike believed him. That belief became the foundation of everything.
Chapter 4. Forging Iron.
Blazing. By 1985, Mike Tyson was ready. At 18 years old, he stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed around 220 pounds, and possessed a combination of speed, power, and aggression that the boxing world had rarely seen. His neck was a column of muscle, his shoulders wide and powerful, his arms quick enough to blur when he threw combinations. But more impressive than his physical gifts was his mental state. Cus D'Amato had spent 5 years conditioning Mike's mind, teaching him to believe in his own inevitability. On March 6, 1985, Mike Tyson made his professional debut against Hector Mercedes at the Empire State Plaza Convention Center in Albany, New York. The fight lasted 1 round. Mike came out like a man possessed, threw a flurry of punches, and Mercedes went down. It was over in 107 seconds. The knockout was so brutal, so definitive, that everyone in attendance understood they had witnessed something special. Mike fought 15 times in his first year as a professional, winning every bout, almost all by knockout. Promoters scrambled to get him on their cards because Mike Tyson was not just winning, he was destroying people. First-round knockouts became his signature. He would walk to the center of the ring as the bell rang, crouch into his peekaboo stance, then explode forward with such speed and ferocity that his opponents simply could not adjust. By the time they figured out what was happening, they were on the canvas. The media began calling him Kid Dynamite and Iron Mike. Headlines screamed about the next great heavyweight. Training footage of Mike hitting the heavy bag went viral before viral was even a concept. People could not believe what they were seeing. A teenage boxer who moved like a lightweight but hit like a sledgehammer. Combinations so fast you needed slow-motion replay to count all the punches. But even as Mike's career accelerated, darkness gathered on the horizon. On November 4, 1985, Cus D'Amato died of pneumonia at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. He was 77 years old. The man who had saved Mike Tyson, who had given him purpose and direction and love, was gone. Mike was 19 years old and suddenly untethered. The timing could not have been worse. Mike was on the verge of everything Cuss had promised, but Cuss would not be there to see it. The grief hit Mike like nothing else ever had. He had lost his mother, but Lorna had been absent long before her death. Cuss had been present every single day, guiding him, believing in him, shaping him into something greater than the streets of Brownsville could have imagined. Some people later speculated that Cuss D'Amato's death was the beginning of Mike Tyson's eventual fall. Without Cuss's steady hand and psychological guidance, without that father figure to keep him grounded, Mike would gradually lose his way. But in that moment, in late 1985, Mike did not fall apart. He did the opposite. He channeled his grief into rage, and that rage fueled him to fulfill every prophecy Cuss had made. Kevin Rooney took over as Mike's primary trainer. Rooney had been one of Cuss's protégés and understood the peekaboo style intimately. Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton, who had been working as Mike's managers under Cuss's supervision, continued guiding his career. The team was solid, professional, committed to making Mike the champion that Cuss had envisioned. But without Cuss's psychological mastery, without that paternal presence, something was missing. Kneeling. In 1986, he tore through the heavyweight division like a force of nature. James Tillis lasted the full 10 rounds, but lost a unanimous decision, notable mainly because he survived. Jesse Ferguson, David Jaco, Mitch Green, Marvis Frazier, all fell to Mike's relentless assault. Each victory brought him closer to a title shot, closer to proving that Cuss D'Amato had been right about everything. Then came the phone call that would change boxing history. Trevor Berbick, the World Boxing Council heavyweight champion, agreed to defend his title against Mike Tyson on November 22, 1986, at the Las Vegas Hilton. Berbick was a solid champion, a veteran who had beaten Muhammad Ali in Ali's final fight. He was confident, even cocky, exercising his right as champion to choose the trunk colors and picking black, Mike's signature color, as a psychological ploy. Distinguished did not understand what he was facing. Mike Tyson was not just another challenger. He was a weapon that Cuss D'Amato had spent 5 years forging. He was vengeance for every beating Mike had taken as a kid in Brownsville. He was the culmination of every hour in the gym, every roadwork session at dawn, every mental conditioning exercise. Mike Tyson was inevitable. The night before the fight, Mike sat in his hotel room thinking about Cuss. He imagined what Cuss would tell him. "You're ready. You've always been ready. Now go show the world." Mike did not sleep much. He rarely did before fights. The adrenaline, the anticipation, the absolute certainty of what he was about to do, it all kept him awake, kept him focused. November 22nd, 1986. The day that would make Mike Tyson a legend. Part 3. The Reign of Terror. Chapter 5. The Youngest King. The walk to the ring felt eternal and instantaneous at the same time. Mike Tyson wore no robe, no elaborate entrance. He simply appeared. Black trunks, black shoes, no socks, a white towel draped over his shoulders. His entrance was minimalist, almost monastic, but it projected pure menace. He did not bounce or dance or showboat. He walked with the grim determination of a man going to work, and his work was violence. Trevor Berbick waited in the ring, trying to look confident, but something in his eyes betrayed him. He could feel it. The entire arena could feel it. This was not going to be a competitive fight. This was going to be an execution. The bell rang. Mike exploded from his corner like he had been shot from a cannon. Berbick tried to establish his jab, tried to use his reach advantage, but Mike was inside before the champion could set his feet. The first hook that landed made Berbick's legs wobble. The crowd gasped. Mike did not pause or celebrate. He threw another combination, and another, working the body and head with a savagery that seemed inhuman. Berbick survived the first round, but barely. His corner tried to rally him, splashing water on his face, shouting encouragement. but the champion knew he was in serious trouble. This was not the fighter he had expected. This was something else entirely. The second round began, and Mike went to work like a surgeon with a sledgehammer. He backed Berbick into the corner and unleashed a left hook that traveled maybe 6 inches but carried all the accumulated rage of Brownsville behind it. The punch caught Berbick on the temple, and the champion's legs betrayed him in spectacular fashion. He went down. He got up at the count of 4. He fell again. He got up, legs still rubber, trying to convince referee Mills Lane that he could continue. He fell a third time. Lane stopped the fight at 2 minutes and 35 seconds of the second round. Michael Gerard Tyson, at 20 years and 4 months old, had become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. He had broken Floyd Patterson's record. He had fulfilled every promise Cus D'Amato ever made. The ring flooded with people, trainers, promoters, media members, hangers-on. Mike stood in the center of the chaos, and for just a moment, something like vulnerability crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask he would wear for years to come. He told reporters, "I came here very confident, and I knew I wasn't leaving this ring alive without the championship of the world. I was throwing deadly and accurate punches. I'll fight anybody. I'm the best fighter in the world. No man can beat me." The words sounded arrogant, but Mike spoke them as simple facts. He was not boasting. He was stating what he knew to be true. For the next 4 years, he would prove it over and over again. Mike Tyson's reign as heavyweight champion was unlike anything boxing had seen in decades. He was not a gentle giant like Muhammad Ali, who toyed with opponents and danced around the ring. He was not a technical master like Larry Holmes, breaking fighters down with precision and experience. Mike Tyson was chaos incarnate, a walking apocalypse who came to end fights as quickly and violently as possible. Unchecked some 7th, 1987, Mike defended his WBC title against James Bone Crusher Smith and won by unanimous decision, adding the WBA championship to his collection. On May 30th, he defeated Pinkland Thomas in 6 rounds. On August 1st, he faced Tony Tucker for the IBF title, won by unanimous decision, and became the first heavyweight in history to hold all 3 major belts simultaneously. The undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, 20 years old. Professionalism, people talked about Mike Tyson the way they once talked about natural disasters. Opponents entered the ring already defeated, psychologically destroyed before the opening bell rang. Mike's reputation as a knockout artist became self-fulfilling. Fighters came in afraid, and fear makes you slow, makes you tentative, makes you vulnerable. Mike fed on that fear. He could see it in their eyes during the stare-down, could feel it when they backed away from his first assault. Once he knew you were scared, it was over. January 22nd, 1988, Mike faced Larry Holmes, the legendary former champion who had dominated the 1970s and early 1980s. Holmes was past his prime at 38 years old, but he was still a master technician, still dangerous. Mike destroyed him in 4 rounds, knocking out Holmes for the first time in his entire career. The image of Holmes, one of the greatest heavyweights ever, crumpled on the canvas because of Mike Tyson's power, sent shockwaves through the sport. Then came June 27th, 1988, and the fight that would define Mike Tyson's peak, Michael Spinks. Spinks was undefeated, a former light heavyweight champion who had moved up to heavyweight and beaten Larry Holmes twice. He was quick, intelligent, technically sound. Many people thought Spinks might actually have the skills to outbox Mike, to use movement and timing to survive and maybe even win. The fight was billed as once and for all, a matchup to determine who was truly the best heavyweight in the world. The fight lasted 91 seconds. Mike came out like a demon from the depths of hell. Spinks tried to circle, tried to use his footwork, but Mike cut off the ring with predatory precision. 30 seconds in, Mike landed a right hand to the body that made Spinks's face contort in pain. Spinks staggered, clinched, tried to recover. Mike pushed him away and threw a right uppercut, followed by a left hook. Spinks went down. He got up at the count of 3, and referee Frank Cappuccino asked if he could continue. Spinks nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. Mike rushed in and threw another combination. Spinks crumbled like a demolished building, and Cappuccino waved the fight off without even bothering to count. In 91 seconds, Mike Tyson had destroyed an undefeated champion and solidified his place as the most feared fighter on the planet. Nights after the Spinks fight, Mike Tyson was not just a champion, he was a cultural phenomenon. Magazine covers, television appearances, endorsement deals, all of it came rushing in. Nintendo released Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, a video game that became one of the most beloved titles in gaming history and introduced Mike to millions of kids who would never watch an actual boxing match. He was everywhere, inescapable, the face of boxing itself. Pedestrians brought complications. Don King, the notorious boxing promoter with the electric hair and questionable ethics, began working his way into Mike's inner circle. King was brilliant at separating fighters from their money, at convincing them that he was the only one who truly cared about their interests while systematically stealing from them. King drove a wedge between Mike and his managers, Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton. When Jacobs died of leukemia in March 1988, King moved in completely, eventually convincing Mike to fire Kevin Rooney and surround himself with yes-men. Without Cus D'Amato's psychological guidance, without the steady hands of Jacobs and the technical expertise of Rooney, Mike Tyson began to drift. The discipline that had defined his rise started to erode. Late-night parties replaced early morning roadwork. Drugs and alcohol became regular companions. Women threw themselves at him, and Mike indulged with the same ferocity he brought to everything else in his life. In February 1988, Mike married actress Robin Givens in a ceremony that seemed more like a business transaction than a romance. Givens and her mother, Ruth Roper, quickly took control of Mike's finances, or tried to. The relationship was toxic from the start, marked by arguments, allegations of domestic violence, and public humiliation. In a notorious interview on ABC's 2020, Givens sat next to Mike and told Barbara Walters that living with him was pure hell, that he was a manic depressive, while Mike sat there looking lost and defeated. The couple divorced in October 1988 after just 8 months of marriage. Psychologists in the armor were showing. Mike was still winning fights, still looking dominant in the ring, but something had changed. The focused warrior that Cus D'Amato had created was slowly being replaced by a man who did not know who he was or what he wanted beyond the next thrill, the next fight, the next self-destructive decision. Chapter 6. Cracks in the armor. The partying got worse. Cocaine, alcohol, women, Mike indulged in all of it with the same lack of restraint he showed in the ring. Stories circulated about all-night benders, about Mike showing up to training hungover or not at all, about the champion losing interest in the very thing that had saved his life. Don King was happy to enable it all. A distracted, unfocused Mike Tyson was easier to control, easier to manipulate. King surrounded Mike with people who would not question him, would not push back, would not demand the discipline that had made him great. Training camps became shorter, less intense. Sparring partners were chosen to make Mike look good rather than to challenge him. The machine that Cus D'Amato had built was slowly falling apart. But even diminished, Mike Tyson was still the most dangerous fighter in the world. In 1989, he defended his title against Frank Bruno and Carl Williams, winning both fights by knockout. He looked slower than before, less sharp, but his power was still there, and power can cover a lot of flaws. Nobody seriously believed Mike would lose. The aura of invincibility remained intact. Then came James Buster Douglas. Part 4. The Fall. Chapter 7. The Impossible Upset. Tokyo, Japan, February 10, 1990. The Tokyo Dome. Partridge Douglas was, by all reasonable measures, a journeyman heavyweight contender with a 29-4-1 record. He was talented, but had never quite put it all together, had lost his one previous title shot against Tony Tucker in 1987. He was overweight, undertrained by his own admission, and coming off personal tragedy. His mother had died just 23 days before the fight. He was a 42-1 underdog, and only one betting parlor even bothered to take action on the fight. This was supposed to be a tune-up for Mike, an easy knockout before moving on to bigger challenges like Evander Holyfield. But Buster Douglas had nothing to lose and everything to prove. From the opening bell, something was wrong. Mike came out flat, his punches lacking their usual snap. Douglas used his jab, a weapon Mike had always struggled with, to keep the champion at bay. The first round went to Douglas, so did the second, and the third. As the fight progressed, Mike's left eye began to swell from Douglas's repeated right hands. His corner, unprepared for a real fight, did not even have an end swell or ice pack. They filled a latex glove with cold tap water and held it against Mike's eye, a detail so emblematic of how far the camp had fallen, it was almost comical. By the fifth round, Mike's eye was swelling shut. HBO announcer Larry Merchant memorably said, "If Mike Tyson, who loves pigeons, was looking for a pigeon in this bout, he hasn't found him." Buster Douglas was not wilting. He was not scared. He was boxing beautifully, using movement and that stiff jab to control the distance. And when Mike got close, Douglas would tie him up or land clean counterpunches. In the eighth round, Mike finally landed a huge right uppercut that dropped Douglas to the canvas. This was it, everyone thought. The knockout was coming. But Douglas got up at the count of 9, survived the round, and came out for the 9th looking as fresh as ever. Whatever shot Mike had left, he had just used it, and it had not been enough. The 10th round began, and Buster Douglas went on the attack. He landed a series of hooks and uppercuts that drove Mike back into the ropes. Then came the sequence that would define boxing history. Douglas threw a straight right hand, followed by a left uppercut, then 4 more punches to the head. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, the seemingly invincible heavyweight champion, went down. Gasoline, he tried to get up. He fumbled for his mouthpiece on the canvas, found one end, and stuck it in his mouth with the other end hanging out in a bizarre, almost pathetic image. He reached for the ropes, tried to pull himself up, but referee Octavio Mayron counted him out. At 2 minutes 50 seconds of the 10th round, James Buster Douglas had pulled off the biggest upset in boxing history. The boxing world went into shock. This was not supposed to be possible. Mike Tyson did not lose. He certainly did not get knocked out. But there he was, sitting on the canvas, beaten, the aura of invincibility shattered forever. Years later, Mike would admit, "My career has been over since 1990. He understood what that loss meant. Everything that Cus D'Amato had built, all the mystique and fear that had made Mike unstoppable, died in Tokyo. He would fight on for another 15 years, would even regain championship belts, but he would never be that fighter again. The monster that terrified the heavyweight division was gone, replaced by a man who had learned he could be beaten. The aftermath was ugly. Mike claimed he had been robbed by a slow count in the 8th round when Douglas went down. Promoters tried to overturn the result. But the truth was simple. Mike had not trained properly, had not taken Douglas seriously, and had paid the ultimate price. The loss was his fault, and somewhere deep down, he knew it. Chapter 8. Behind Bars. If the Douglas loss shattered Mike's invincibility, what happened next destroyed what was left of his public image. In July 1991, Mike attended the Indiana Black Expo in Indianapolis, where the Miss Black America pageant was being held. He met Desiree Washington, an 18-year-old contestant, Miss Black, Rhode Island. On July 19th, in the early hours of the morning, Mike invited her to his hotel room at the Canterbury Hotel. What happened in that room would be disputed, argued over, analyzed in courtrooms and media for years to come. Desiree Washington accused Mike Tyson of rape. Mike maintained the encounter was consensual. He said he had been clear about his intentions, that Washington knew why she was coming to his room. But Washington told a different story. She said Mike had forced himself on her despite her protests, that he had laughed when she cried, that he had treated the whole thing like a game. Slashing the trial began on January 27, 1992, in Indianapolis, and it became a media sensation. Mike's attorney, Vincent Fuller, was a high-powered lawyer from Washington, D.C., who had successfully defended John Hinckley Jr. in the attempted assassination of President Reagan. But Fuller seemed out of his depth in this case, making questionable strategic decisions from the beginning, including allowing Mike to testify before the grand jury and at trial, decisions that may have sealed his fate. Subjected, the special prosecutor, Gregory Garrison, painted a picture of Mike as a predator who used his fame and power to victimize a young woman. The defense tried to portray Washington as a calculating opportunist who was after money. But the jury, after deliberating for nearly 10 hours, returned a guilty verdict on February 10, 1992, exactly 2 years after the Douglas loss. Mike Tyson was convicted of rape and 2 counts of criminal deviant conduct. On March 26, 1992, Judge Patricia Gifford sentenced Mike to 6 years in prison with 4 years of probation. At 25 years old, at an age when most fighters are entering their prime, Mike Tyson was heading to the Indiana Youth Center, later renamed Plainfield Correctional Facility. Mike maintained his innocence throughout and continues to do so to this day. In his autobiography, he wrote, "I did not rape Desiree Washington. She knows it, God knows it, and the consequences of her actions are something that she's got to live with for the rest of her life." But the legal system had spoken, and appeals were denied. Prison could have destroyed Mike Tyson. Many thought it would. But in some ways, the structure and isolation were exactly what he needed. Without the distractions, without the hangers-on and enablers, Mike was forced to confront himself. He read voraciously, everything from philosophy to history. He converted to Islam, taking the name Malik Abdul Aziz, though he would not use it publicly. He trained, maintaining his physical conditioning, even though he did not know if he would ever fight again. The prison tattoos he got during this time told their own story. Arthur Ashe, the tennis player who had fought for dignity and justice. Che Guevara, the revolutionary. Mao Zedong, the revolutionary leader. These were not the choices of someone content with his situation. These were the choices of someone trying to make sense of power and powerlessness, of who he was and who he might become. Mike served just under 3 years of his sentence, released on March 25, 1995. He was 28 years old, still young enough to fight, but the world he returned to was very different from the one he had left. The boxing landscape had changed, new fighters had emerged, and Mike Tyson was no longer the undisputed champion or the most feared man in the sport. He was an ex-convict trying to rebuild what he had lost. But Mike was nothing if not a fighter. Within 5 months of his release, he was back in the ring, facing Peter McNeely on August 19, 1995. The fight lasted 89 seconds before McNeely's manager jumped into the ring to save his fighter from further punishment. The old power was still there. The question was whether anything else remained. Part 5. Redemption Denied. Chapter 9. Return of the Beast. Mike Tyson's comeback was meteoric. He fought 4 times in 1995 and 1996, winning all his bouts and regaining the WBC and WBA titles in March and September of 1996. For a brief moment, it looked like Mike might reclaim his old glory, might prove that the wilderness years were just a detour on the path to greatness. But there was something different about this version of Mike Tyson. The peekaboo style that Cus D'Amato had drilled into him was mostly gone, replaced by a more crude approach that relied on power and intimidation. The mental edge that had made him unstoppable seemed dulled. He was still winning, still dangerous, but he was not the fighter he had been in his prime. The boxing world focused on one fight above all others: Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. Holyfield, the real deal, was everything Mike was not at this point in their careers. He was disciplined, deeply religious, technically sound, and in his physical prime at 34 years old. Holyfield had retired briefly, but came back and was now considered one of the best heavyweights in the world. The first fight took place on November 9, 1996, at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. Mike was the favorite, but from the opening bell, it was clear something was wrong. Holyfield was not intimidated. He met Mike's aggression with aggression, and when Mike got close, Holyfield used subtle but effective headbutts that opened cuts above Mike's eyes. Whether the headbutts were intentional or accidental became a point of controversy, but referee Mitch Halpin ruled them accidental and did not penalize Holyfield. The fight was brutal, both men landing heavy shots, but Holyfield was outboxing Mike, using superior conditioning and technique to control the pace. In the 11th round, Holyfield landed a series of punches that forced referee Mills Lane to stop the fight. Mike Tyson had lost again, this time by TKO, and once again, a heavyweight championship had slipped through his fingers. The rematch was inevitable. The public wanted it, promoters wanted it, and both fighters wanted another massive payday. The bout was scheduled for June 28, 1997, again at the MGM Grand, this time with referee Mills Lane in charge. It would become one of the most infamous nights in sports history.
Chapter 10. The Bite Heard Around the World.
Something was wrong with Mike from the moment he entered the ring. He came out for the third round without his mouthpiece, and Lane had to order him back to his corner to put it in. Mike's frustration was visible, his anger barely contained. Holyfield had headbutted him again in the second round, opening another cut, and Mike believed it was intentional, believed the referee was letting Holyfield get away with fouls. Then, with 40 seconds left in the third round, Mike did something that would define him in the public consciousness forever. He bit Evander Holyfield's ear. Not a playful bite, not an accidental brush. Mike opened his mouth and bit down on Holyfield's right ear, tearing off a 1-inch piece of cartilage. Holyfield leaped into the air, screaming in pain, blood pouring from the wound. Mills Lane called time, examined the injury, consulted with the ringside physician, and decided to continue the fight after deducting 2 points from Mike. Camouflage. The fight resumed. And then Mike bit Holyfield's other ear. Lane stopped the fight immediately this time and disqualified Mike Tyson. The crowd erupted in chaos, some people cheering, others throwing drinks and debris into the ring. Mike tried to rush Holyfield's corner, and security had to surround both fighters to keep them separated. It was madness, a complete breakdown of everything boxing was supposed to be. In the post-fight interview, Mike tried to justify his actions. "What am I to do? This is my career. I can't continue getting butted like that. I got children to raise, and this guy keeps butting me, trying to cut me. I gotta retaliate." But the excuses fell flat. What people saw was a fighter who had completely lost control, who had resorted to the tactics of a street brawl when faced with a superior opponent. The Nevada State Athletic Commission revoked Mike's boxing license and fined him $3 million, the maximum allowed by law, 10% of his purse. He was banned from boxing indefinitely. Forgiveness. Later, Mike would speak more honestly about the incident. He told interviewers, "I bit him because I wanted to kill him. I was really mad about my head being bumped and everything. I really lost consciousness of the whole fight. It took me out of my fight plan and everything." The admission was startling in its honesty. Mike had not been calculating or strategic. He had simply become the Brownsville street fighter again, reacting with pure violence to being hurt and frustrated. The ear-biting incident became a cultural touchstone, referenced in movies, television shows, music. It overshadowed everything else Mike had accomplished, reduced him to a punchline. The redemption story that his comeback might have told was over before it really began. Mike's boxing license was reinstated in October 1998, and he fought sporadically for another 7 years, but his career was effectively finished. He lost to Lennox Lewis in 2002, knocked out by Danny Williams in 2004, and quit on his stool against Kevin McBride in 2005. In his final press conference, Mike spoke with brutal honesty. "I don't have the guts to be in this sport anymore. I'm not going to quit on my stool, but I'm not going to disrespect the sport anymore by losing to opponents like McBride." He was 38 years old and completely broke. Part 6. Bankruptcy and Rebirth. Chapter 11. The Price of Excess. In 2003, Mike Tyson filed for bankruptcy, listing $23 million in debt. The filing was stunning in its revelations. At his peak, Mike had earned over $400 million from boxing alone. Where had all that money gone? The answer was both predictable and tragic. Mike had lived like there would be no tomorrow, spending with the same ferocity he brought to fighting. The list of expenditures read like a parody of excess. Multiple mansions, including a 19,500 square foot estate in Connecticut with its own nightclub. A $2 million gold-plated bathtub, dozens of luxury cars, over $400,000 per year maintaining a flock of exotic pigeons. 3 Bengal tigers that cost $70,000 each, plus another $4,000 per month for care. Jewelry, clothes, gifts to strangers. The money poured out as fast as it came in. Part of the problem: Don King, Mike's promoter, had allegedly stolen millions from him over the years. Mike filed a lawsuit claiming King had cheated him out of over $100 million. The lawsuit was settled, but the damage was done. Between the theft, the spending, and the poor financial management, Mike Tyson had managed to burn through a fortune that should have lasted several lifetimes. Peeled divorce settlements added to the burden. Mike had married and divorced twice more after robbing Givens, each divorce costing millions. Child support payments, legal fees, unpaid taxes. The debts piled up until they were insurmountable. Mike's life after retirement was a struggle. He admitted to cocaine use, to feeling lost and purposeless. In interviews, he spoke with haunting honesty. "My whole life has been a waste. I've been a failure." He talked about not thinking he would survive his 30s, about the darkness that had always been inside him, threatening to swallow him completely. For several years, Mike Tyson seemed destined to become another cautionary tale. The gifted athlete who rose from nothing, achieved everything, and ended up with less than nothing. But somewhere in that darkness, something shifted. Chapter 12. The Phoenix Rises. Rushing the turning point came unexpectedly. In 2009, Mike appeared in a comedy film called The Hangover, playing a fictionalized version of himself. The role was small but memorable, and critics were surprised by Mike's comedic timing and his willingness to poke fun at his own image. The movie was a massive hit, and suddenly Mike Tyson was relevant again, but in a completely different way. Man Show with a one-man show called Undisputed Truth, his life story on stage with brutal honesty. He talked about his childhood trauma, his crimes, his victories, his failures, his addictions. The show was raw and painful and cathartic, both for Mike and for audiences who saw a human being rather than the monster the media had created. Mike got sober. He met and married his third wife, Lakia Kiki Spicer, and focused on being a better father to his children. He started a podcast called Hot Boxing with Mike Tyson, where he interviewed celebrities and athletes and showed a thoughtful, introspective side that few people knew existed. But the real transformation came through business. Mike entered the booming cannabis industry in 2016, starting Tyson Ranch, a 40-acre marijuana farm in California. The business exploded, generating millions in revenue and establishing Mike as a legitimate entrepreneur. He later rebranded as Tyson 2.0, expanding across the United States and Canada. The company's products, including edibles, concentrates, and flour, became popular across the legal cannabis market. In a moment of inspired marketing genius, Mike partnered with his old rival Evander Holyfield to create Holy Ears, cannabis edibles shaped like an ear with a bite taken out of it. The product turned one of Mike's worst moments into a source of humor and profit, showing that Mike had learned to make peace with his past. By 2020, Mike was worth an estimated $10 million, nowhere near his peak wealth, but a remarkable recovery from bankruptcy. More importantly, he seemed at peace. He talked openly about his demons, his mistakes, his ongoing struggles with mental health. He became an advocate for therapy and personal growth, speaking honestly about the work required to change. In November 2020, at age 54, Mike returned to the ring for an exhibition fight against Roy Jones Jr. The bout ended in a draw, but what mattered was seeing Mike back in shape, focused, proving that he could still perform at a high level. The event generated massive pay-per-view sales and reminded the world that Mike Tyson's story was far from over. In November 2024, Mike faced Jake Paul, a 27-year-old YouTuber turned boxer, in a highly publicized bout at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. At 58 years old, Mike earned $20 million for the fight, bringing his net worth up to an estimated $30 million. Though he lost the fight by decision, he proved that his name still carried enormous commercial weight. More importantly, he showed a side of himself that younger fans had never seen: disciplined, professional, honest about his limitations. The Mike Tyson of 2024 was not the Mike Tyson of 1988 or 1997. He was slower in the ring, but wiser outside it. He had reconciled with many of his demons, though he admitted they would never fully leave. He had learned, painfully and over decades, that the violence that made him a champion was also the thing that nearly destroyed him, and that true strength came not from intimidating others, but from mastering himself. In 2025, Mike purchased a $13 million waterfront estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Not the reckless spending of his youth, but a calculated investment reflecting genuine financial recovery. He had gone from destitute to comfortable, from self-destructive to self-aware, from hated to respected. It's not a perfect redemption story. Mike Tyson had hurt people, physically and emotionally. The rape conviction remained on his record, a stain that could never be fully washed away, regardless of his proclamations of innocence. The violence, the chaos, the pain he had caused. None of that disappeared just because he found peace later in life. But it was a human story, messy and complicated, about a boy who was brutalized by poverty and violence, who found salvation in boxing, who let that salvation slip away through arrogance and poor choices, who hit rock bottom and somehow found the strength to climb back up. Not all the way back to the top, but back to solid ground, back to something resembling stability and purpose.
Epilogue: The Legacy of Iron Mike.
So what do we make of Mike Tyson? How do we measure a life that contains such extraordinary highs and devastating lows? Is he a hero or a villain, a victim or a perpetrator? The answer, as with most things human, is that he is all of these things and none of them, simultaneously and at different times. Mike Tyson was, without question, one of the greatest heavyweight boxers who ever lived. At his peak, in those 3 or 4 years when Cus D'Amato's training and psychological conditioning held firm, Mike was unstoppable. His combination of speed, power, and intimidation factor was unique in boxing history. He made grown men afraid before they even climbed through the ropes. That's not hyperbole, it's documented fact. Clang, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, the first fighter to simultaneously hold all 3 major belts, 50 wins, 44 by knockout. These numbers tell part of the story, but they do not capture the visceral impact of watching Mike Tyson fight. The way he would crouch into that peekaboo stance and then explode forward like a compressed spring releasing. The way his punches sounded different, heavier, more final than anyone else's. The way he could end a fight with a single punch from a distance that seemed impossible. But Mike Tyson's legacy extends far beyond his accomplishments in the ring. He became a cultural icon, a symbol of both the possibility and the danger of raw power. He showed what could happen when you took a kid from the absolute bottom of society and gave him a path upward, but also what happened when that path was built on violence, and that violence was never fully tamed. The rape conviction cannot be ignored or minimized. A woman accused him of one of the worst crimes imaginable. A jury of his peers found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and he served time in prison. Whether he actually committed that crime or was wrongly convicted is something only two people truly know. What we do know is that the conviction exists, and it shapes how we must view his story. The ear-biting incident revealed something about Mike that was both disturbing and tragically human. When pushed to his breaking point, when confronted with failure and frustration, he reverted to the Brownsville street fighter who solved problems with violence. All the training, all the discipline, all the transformation Cus D'Amato had worked to achieve, in that moment, it all evaporated, and what remained was a man who had never fully healed from his childhood trauma. But then there is the Mike Tyson of the last 15 years, the man who has spoken openly about his demons, who has sought therapy and worked on himself, who has built businesses and raised children and tried to be better. This version of Mike does not erase the earlier versions, but it complicates them, adds layers to a story that could have been simple, but instead is maddeningly complex. Mike Tyson's story resonates because it is America's story writ large. The promise that anyone can rise from nothing if they have enough talent and work hard enough. The reality that systemic poverty and childhood trauma leave scars that never fully heal. The seduction of money and fame, and the way they can destroy as easily as they elevate. The possibility of redemption, even after terrible mistakes, if you are willing to do the work. Cus D'Amato looked at that 13-year-old kid from Brownsville and saw a future champion. He was right. But he also saw something else. A boy who needed to be saved from himself. For a few years, Cus succeeded. The structure he imposed, the psychological conditioning, the father figure presence, it held the darkness at bay and allowed Mike's gifts to shine through. But Cus died, and the darkness came back. It always comes back, for all of us, if we do not have the tools and support to fight it. Mike did not have those tools. He had talent and rage and money, but not the emotional foundation to handle the pressure and temptation that came with being Mike Tyson. The greatest tragedy of Mike Tyson's story is not the losses or the bankruptcy or even the prison time. The greatest tragedy is wondering what he might have become if Cus D'Amato had lived another 10 years. If he had that steady presence to guide him through the pitfalls of fame and wealth, to remind him who he was and who he wanted to be. We will never know. What we know instead is what actually happened. A spectacular rise, a catastrophic fall, and a hard-fought climb back to something resembling peace. In his 50s, Mike Tyson has become a philosopher of sorts, speaking about the nature of struggle and redemption. He talks about how money does not bring happiness, how fame is a prison of its own kind, how the violence that made him rich also destroyed him. He talks about the work of healing, the ongoing battle with depression and anger, the importance of being honest about who you are and what you have done. Mike Tyson, for his crimes and mistakes, that is their right. Some people will always see him as the baddest man on the planet, the warrior who made heavyweight boxing exciting again. That is their right too. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Mike Tyson is not a cautionary tale, though his story contains warnings. He is not a redemption story, though his life contains redemption. He is not a monster, though he has done monstrous things. He is not a hero, though he has inspired millions. He is a human being who was given extraordinary gifts and extraordinary burdens, who rose to unimaginable heights and fell to crushing lows, who has spent the last 2 decades trying to figure out who he is beyond the violence that defined him for so long. On those rooftops in Brownsville, watching his pigeons fly free above the poverty and crime, young Mike Tyson must have dreamed of escape, of being something more than what the streets demanded. He achieved that dream in the most spectacular way possible, becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history, becoming rich and famous and feared around the world. But then he learned what many champions before him had learned, that achieving your dreams does not heal your wounds, that money and fame cannot fill the void inside you, that you carry your trauma wherever you go until you face it directly and do the hard work of healing. Mike Tyson's legacy is not his championship belts or his knockout record or even his infamous behavior. His legacy is the reminder that we are all works in progress, that change is possible even after terrible mistakes, that the darkness we carry does not have to define us forever. The pigeons still fly. The boy from Brownsville is now a man approaching 60, still fighting, still struggling, still searching for peace. His story is not over. It may never be truly over. But it is a story worth telling, worth examining, worth learning from. Because in the end, Mike Tyson's story is not just about boxing. It is about the human condition itself, about the eternal battle between our better angels and our demons, about the price we pay for violence and the difficult path to redemption. It is about what happens when you give a hurt child the tools to become powerful, but not the tools to become whole. The bell has rung countless times throughout Mike Tyson's life. Each fight, each victory, each defeat, each new chapter. And through it all, he keeps standing up, keeps trying to be better, keeps working towards some understanding of who he was, who he became, and who he might still be. That, perhaps more than any championship or knockout, is the real story of Mike Tyson. Not the monster the media created, not the hero some fans imagine, but the complicated, damaged, resilient human being who refuses to give up, refuses to stop fighting, even when the opponent is himself. The youngest heavyweight champion in history. The man who bit another man's ear. The ex-convict who lost everything. The entrepreneur who rebuilt from nothing. Mike Tyson contains all these identities and more, a walking contradiction, a living testament to human complexity. His voice, that distinctive high-pitched voice that made him a target as a child, now tells his story in interviews and podcasts. His hands, those terrifying weapons that could end fights in seconds, now shake hands with old rivals and sign autographs for fans who were not even born when he was champion. Time moves forward. The body slows. The demons quiet, though they never fully disappear. And Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, the kid from Brownsville who conquered the world and lost himself, continues his journey towards something that looks, from certain angles, like peace. The pigeons still fly. And somewhere in Florida, in a mansion bought with cannabis money and exhibition fights, Mike Tyson watches them, remembering the boy he was, accepting the man he became, and working every day to be the man he wants to be. That is not the ending anyone would have predicted on November 22nd, 1986, when a 20-year-old destroyed Trevor Berbick and became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. But it is the ending we have, messy and imperfect and undeniably human. And perhaps that is exactly the right ending for a story that was never really about perfection, but about the struggle itself, the eternal fight between darkness and light that rages inside all of us, played out on the biggest stages and in the smallest moments, with the whole world watching and nobody really knowing how it would end. The story of Mike Tyson is not finished. As long as he lives, as long as he continues trying to be better, the story continues. not as tragedy or triumph, but as something more honest. The story of a man who was hurt, who hurt others, who lost everything, and who somehow found the strength to keep fighting for redemption, even when redemption seemed impossible. That fight, more than any bout in any ring, may be his greatest victory.